Alright, I'm gonna actually close these now. I don't think we'll need those anymore. Alright, so like I said, we're gonna do actual caching of the result of our actual sim. So drop a geometry node down here, call it something liquid cache. I like to make these light purple to kind of associate them with their sim. Your mileage may vary. So in a similar manner, in fact so similar that I'm just going to start by copying these two, the dot import fields and file cache from here, paste them here. We actually pretty much want the same thing. We want, and again, go to the second frame to see that it's working. We want to import from the sim, from that node, the velocity of the surface, and we also want the geometry. So geometry is going to be the actual points. So if I were to make this invisible, you can see we have the points. It says smoke, but it's just points. Now, as I also said earlier, we can say, just call this something else, and that's enough. Now, this resolves into being called something else. It even gets its own subdirectory and everything. It'll just be very convenient to copy this around whenever we want. Now, we don't, though, however, want to just cache the result. There can be a lot of points. Remember when I said there could be like 70 million points? There's this thing here called fluid compress that you should pretty much always use. All the fluid tools kind of expect it, like the particle surfacer we're about to use expects this anyway. Fluid compress is just a clever little thing that says all those points that are, I'm trying the particle separation here, all of those points that are deeper inside of the surface here can be deleted because they're so far inside we don't need them. We only really need the points near the surface, basically within 4 voxels of the surface. Those are the ones that are going to actually contribute to the shape of the surface. The particles that are deeper than that will never matter. They'll just be inside. Like, you can't see individual drop of water inside of a glass of water. So it just deletes them all, knowing that it could always recreate them whenever it wants, just by filling the inside of that sign distance surface function whenever it wants to. It also makes sure to just keep the relevant attributes. Now, there's a few back here, these vorticity and rest attributes. While we're talking about them, we don't want to forget about them. I'm not going to explain it right now what they do, but let us tell the solver to write those attributes for us. So go to particle motion, vorticity, just say add vorticity attribute, don't worry about what it is. And in the rest tab, say add rest attribute, don't worry about what it is. Change to 25, don't worry about why. We just want these to be written into our caches, because later when our caches are taking a long time to write, I don't want to say like, oh yeah, forgot to turn this on, go recache it. So cache those attributes now so that we can talk about them later. In any case, it will keep them because of this. These are both attributes that are going to be stored on the points. You don't need to add them here. They're not separate fields. So unfortunately, the fluid compress, you know, it does a great job, but it makes it hard to look at. Should have chosen that frame. It looks like this now. Even though we made the velocity volume invisible, that's visible now. Particularly interesting is if you look at the, if you were to delete the surface and velocity, you have all these boxes. These boxes are little packages of all the particles. It makes it easier to load or not load if it's not on screen or whatever. You can see if you unpack them, the particles are still in there. If you really want to view them the proper way, put a particle fluid surface down and change this convert to particles and say visualize velocity, and this will look like the way that you're used to seeing it. This recreates the particles on the inside, like I said. It recolorizes them based on the velocity. So we can always look at the, I guess I should do it on this one. We can always look at the results here. So let's go ahead and cache this. Oh, this should definitely not be using the proxy sim anymore, so turn that off for sure. And let's Let's save that for a moment. Or let's save a few frames of it. So there we go, a few frames. So we can script through this. We have it. Now, later on, the sim will take a long time to run. It'll take upwards of 2 minutes to run per frame, depending on the speed of your computer, how much resolution we have, blah, blah, blah. Another thing that takes a moment is actually doing a particle fluid surface, meaning actually making geometry from that. By default, it looks like crap. We need to, again, bind the particle separation here, like so. And now it will actually know what the contribution for the size of the particles. So there you go. We now have the mesh that we will actually render, the polygon surface. So that's cool. We're starting to see it come together now. The thing is, it takes a while to calculate it. And this is at a fairly low resolution. So what we want is to cache this too. Why 2 caches in a row? Why not just cache this one here? Because this cache is actually going to be fed right into the whitewater solver. The whitewater doesn't care about the final polygon surface, but the whitewater does care about the velocity field and the surface and the stuff like that. So later on, we'll have this get read by the whitewater solver. So in fact, I'll just say liquid sim here, and I'll say liquid surface here, just so we can reference these easier. Cool. If you hold A and left click down, you can do this cool organization thing. All right, so this will be called liquid surface. That's what it is. I would also mention that when we work with these liquid surfaces and things, whenever you work with a cache that will be rendered, and just as a spoiler alert, this is literally what will be rendered later on. We're not going to do any more modifications to this surface. So go to the load from file tab and say load packed disk primitive. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. I just don't want to forget to do it. Essentially, whenever you render something in Mantra, it saves a copy of whatever the result is to disk, and then Mantra reads it from disk and renders it. This says you can skip saving this to disk and then reloading it because it is already saved to disk. It's right here. It's the file that we saved to disk. If we loaded this file from disk, modified it in some way in Houdini, then sure, you'd have to save that modified version to disk because there is no disk representation of it. But packed disk primitive is a huge efficiency gain that says we don't make any more modifications to this file that's already on disk, so just use it. That said, if you copy and paste these file cache nodes around later, in no other circumstance do we want this to be set to packed disk primitive, only this one right here. So make sure you turn that off if you do copy and paste this, or just copy and paste this one instead. Okay, and also display it as full geometry. Now, the annoying thing that we get into is we now have 3 different file cache nodes. In fact, I'm just going to push this to the next chapter.